Let's get back to Daniel. Daniel, starting with verse 8, says, "Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter." So here his ego has been fed. No one can take their petitions to anyone but you for 30 days because you are so wonderful and so important that this is going to be great. So he signs the decree. When Daniel found out about the decree, he didn't run and hide. He didn't shut up his windows. He went home, he opened his windows, and he prayed openly, not in secret. Daniel was faithful to God because he knew God had always been faithful to him. He had a love relationship with his God, and he wanted to serve him no matter what. Verse 10 continues, "He knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks in his upper room with his windows open towards Jerusalem." Daniel knew that where there's no prayer, there's no power. He knew that it was essential to stand his ground and be faithful to the God that he had loved and served all these years. You know, Daniel was obedient to Darius. He was a good servant to his king, but not more so than he was to God. He knew that God had enabled him to interpret dreams. He knew that God had led Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego through the fiery furnace. He knew that this was a God that could be trusted and a God that he should remain faithful to. Darius knew, or rather Daniel knew, that God was his source of strength. He knew that whenever he went to the Lord in prayer, that it was not some jibber-jabber that was just said and done. It wasn't something that was merely ceremonial. He knew that when his prayers were lifted up to heaven, that God received them and would answer them. You know, you can imagine the governors in their envious frenzy running over to Daniel's house to see if they could catch him, see if they could get him. I can imagine that they snuck behind trees and were looking to see if they could see him up in the window. But you know, they didn't even have to do that because he wasn't trying to hide it. He was out in the open. So they found Daniel praying and making his supplications before God. You know, there are several issues with this decree that I think are important for us to see. It goes beyond their jealousy and their envy and trying to catch Daniel doing something that he wasn't supposed to be doing. Verse 12 tells us that after they caught him, they went before the king and said, "Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions?" The king answered and said, "The thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter." Their law couldn't change. Once the king had made a law, there was no changing it, not for any reason. And this brings us to our first issue. We have a contrast between God's law and the law of man, Darius's law. God's law says, don't worship any other gods before me. I am the only God. Darius's law said, just for 30 days, worship me. Just a little compromise, right? The second thing we see here is that there is a conflict over worship itself. Who to worship, how to worship, when to worship. Do we worship God or do we worship man? Do we worship by God's commands, or do we worship the way tradition says? And the time element is important as well. Put off your worship for 30 days. You don't have to never worship God again. You don't ever have to never pray to God again, just for this little period of time. It'll be okay. It's a compromise. It's a dangerous thing when we let a compromise creep into our life. You know, at the end of Daniel's life, he had served God for many years, from the time he was just a teenage boy. And now here he is, an old man, at the end of his life, and he's faced with this enormous test. When we look at what we'll be faced with here in the last days to remain faithful to God, there's a test there also at the end of Earth's history. Do we remain faithful to God and do things His way? Or do we give in and compromise and do things the way that the world tells us to do? Take a look at Revelation chapter 14, starting with verse 6. It says, "Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people." You know, there is a universal message that's going out. And it's not just for us here in this room. It's not just for this country. It's going to affect, and it does affect, everyone all over this world. No language barrier is going to matter. The truth about God's love and about who Jesus is and about God's law and living God's way is going out to every one of us. And that test will be for every one of us. The message is, fear God and give glory to Him, for the hour of His judgment has come. Worship Him who made heaven and earth, the sea and springs of water. Worship the Creator. He is the one who made you, who formed you. You know, we look at this word fear and sometimes we think of simply being afraid of something. But that's not always the meaning of the word. Fear can also mean to give reverence or respect. And when we speak about God, He is a loving and tender Father, but we are also to give Him respect and reverence. And we can do that by obeying His commandments and respecting who He is as Creator of this world. Verse 9 in chapter 14 of Revelation also says, "Then a third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast." So in verse 7 we learn that we are to worship the Creator. And in verse 9 we learn that we are to not worship the beast. Verse 12 goes on, "Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus." So we know we want to worship the Creator. We don't want to worship the beast. And this is how we're going to do it. We're going to keep God's commandments. We're going to worship Jesus as our Lord and Savior. When we have this love for God, this obedience to Him for who He is, we can work out, or rather express our faith in Jesus simply by our obedience to God. You know, in Daniel's day, there was a human leader that wanted to pass a decree that would forbid genuine worship. That's what he did. In our last days, we're going to find essentially the same thing. It's going to be bow down and worship or die. Bow down and worship or remain true to the living God. We found that in Daniel chapter 3 with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Rather than walking through the fiery furnace, they could have said, "Okay, no problem. I'm just going to I'm just going to go with this for right now because I can change my mind later. God knows my heart, right? But they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't compromise. Now in Daniel chapter 6, we see the same thing with Daniel. You know, there's a question I'd like to present to everyone just for our own personal reflection. As easy as things are in this life for us, we essentially have a pretty easy go of it, especially here where we are. If we can't be faithful now, how are we going to be faithful when the test of all time comes? It's so important to remember that Daniel didn't remain faithful simply through a one-day decision that he made. It was a lifetime of making wise choices, a lifetime of not relying on his own wisdom and understanding, but relying on God's. Back to Daniel. Verse 12 says, "And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, The thing is true according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter." Verse 13, "So they answered and said before the king, That Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king." I want to stop here and pause for just a minute, because here we go with the jealousy again, right? Here's the jealousy again. That Daniel, that captive, he's not one of us, right? Sowing the seeds of discontent, anything they could do. And they knew that they had him. They knew that the king could not change the law. But they just had to add that extra in there, didn't they? He doesn't show due regard for you or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petitions 3 times a day. He didn't just pray to his God once, he did it 3 times. We saw it. The king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, because now he realized he had been tricked. He realized what had happened. He set out in his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. He knew, though, in the end, the conspirators had their way. There was nothing he could do to change it. Darius wasn't willing, of course, to put his own neck on the line for Daniel, even though he was pleased with Daniel. He had nothing that he could serve as an alternative. He had to give forth a decree. So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. I find this verse very interesting, because here we have a king who does not serve the living God, yet he recognizes that Daniel is different because he does. He recognizes that Daniel does serve a living God, and he says, don't worry about it, your God is going to deliver you. That's one of the boldest faith statements I think that is in the Bible, at least one of them. Imagine the situation, this pit of certainly not tame, probably very hungry lions. And here's Daniel, an old man, and there he goes into the pit. The stone is rolled in front. The king seals it with his signet. That's it. He's done for. I can imagine that the governors and the satraps that were so jealous of Daniel were probably just leaping for joy. They were so happy what they thought they had accomplished. But that wasn't how Darius responded. He was very upset. He went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No musicians were brought before him. His sleep went from him. He tossed and turned. He could not sleep. He was in a complete state of just distraught. I can imagine that he probably didn't sleep a wink the whole night. Nothing he could do. How ironic, the wealthiest man man in probably the entire country couldn't find peace. And then we have Daniel. Every reason to be upset, every reason to think that there was nothing left for him but to face his death. And I can imagine that Daniel slept like a baby, cuddled up next to one of those hungry, dirty, nasty lions. But you know something, it's not the things that you have, it's not the position that you have, it's not your job or the house that you live in or the car that you drive or the clothes that you have or the friends that you have that brings peace. It only comes from God, and it comes from something that He places in your heart when you have that relationship with Him and you know that He is the only one true living God. You know, I just want to point out one thing before we move on, and that is that a person who relies on things of this life for their peace and their joy, they'll be happy for a moment. When things are good, they're happy. When things are bad, they're not. And for those of us who love God and want that relationship with Him, we can have it. That's all it takes, is wanting it and being willing to be obedient and love Him and let Him make the change in you that He makes in all of us. The difference between the two is only this. It's not that you'll never know sadness. It's not that you'll never have another bad experience. But when you love God, all those bad things really are minimalized, because you know that through it all you have a peace in your heart, that you can trust God no matter what's going on in your life, that He is going to get you through it. And that's what Daniel had. King Darius, on the other hand, was a little more nervous. In verse 19, we learned that he rose up early in the morning. He rushed to Daniel to see what was going on. He cried out to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" And Daniel answered, "My God sent His angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they have not hurt me." He said, "My God. My God sent His angel. My God has delivered me." You know, there is a lion tamer, and He looks to each one of us tonight. And it doesn't matter what's going on in your life, what troubles you might have. God can tame that lion. You might think that you're surrounded by the lions, that you're in a pit with no way out. But God has not left you. He has not forsaken you.